So Tarawih comes from the root raha. And raha means what? Means? It has a root, it has a meaning of the wind, but also rest. You say Tarawih is about rest? I don't know what Tarawih you're praying, matey. There's not much rest in our mosque especially. You know, I hardly get my Subhanallah al-Mulki wal-Malakut, I hardly hear them when they're up again. And so the idea, why is it called Tarawih? Well, it's rest for the spirit. We can look at it from that perspective. But also, they used to take rests between each 4 rakahs of Tarawih. In Mecca, in the time of the Sahaba, what they would do, they would pray 4 rakahs and then they would go do tawaf between them. Okay, so that's quite a bit of a break between the 4. So the people in Medina, they said, they can't be getting one on us. So they decided to pray, I can't remember how many rakahs, about 8 rakahs between it to get the reward of the tawaf. Because they weren't. So in Medina they used to pray, so I think it was like something like, I can't remember, 36 or 38 rakahs. And people think that that was Imam Malik's position, that Tarawih is 38, I can't remember the number. That wasn't the case, that's a misunderstanding. He had it as 20, but they prayed 4 extra between, or how many they prayed between the rakahs, so because they wanted to compete with the people in Mecca who were doing tawaf between them. And so you think, my goodness me. And when I was a new Muslim, I was living in Morocco for many years, I used to struggle with 20. I could not do 20, my legs would give way. And so I'd do about, you know, I confess, I did about 6, 8 or anything, and then I walked, okay. Then one night I said to myself, right, that is it. I'm gonna go with them. I'm gonna do the full 20, okay. And 20 had gone, and I was like, I am sure they've done 20. And they got up again. And what I realized after about 28 is that it was Laylatul Qadr, and in Morocco, they go all night to Fajr. So I said, I'm going home now after 28. I said, the one night I have this resolve to do my 20, and I couldn't even, because they do about 2 khatams in Morocco of the Quran in Tarawih. They really go for it. And they do 10 rakahs after Isha, and then they get up before Fajr and do another 10 in the mosque before Fajr. And they split it up to make it easier, but they go really long in each rakah. And then one time I went to join my friend who was leading Tarawih in Casablanca, and I was put in the front row every night because I was his guest, and I was swinging my knees through the whole thing, like, oh my goodness me. So I found it very, very difficult in Morocco because their Tarawihs are really long, even though they're only doing 10 after Isha. So, so they used to take a break, and some mosques do this, don't they? They have like a little talk between things and so forth. That's the concept, and it's about wind, relax. Raha comes from the meaning of wind, breeze, the soul. So it's this idea of like spiritual relief and expansion, the Tarawih. So, how to pray Tarawih? This is I always laugh. They say the first 10 days of Ramadan is what? What's the famous hadith? The first 10 days of Ramadan is mercy. Second 10 days of Ramadan is forgiveness. The last 10 days of Ramadan is, do you remember, freedom from the hellfire? I say, no, it's not. First 10 days of Ramadan is, when did you start Ramadan? Second 10 days of Ramadan is how many Tarawih are you praying? And the third 10 of Rak'ahs is when you're going to do Eid. That's our Ramadan, okay? And so, this is the issue. How many do you pray? Okay, so we're going to get a bit technical on this. Okay, the idea we see from the Prophet ﷺ, he says, whomsoever fasts Ramadan and stands its night in prayer, believing in God's promise and sincerely, all of his past sins will be forgiven. And so this is a very blessed act, standing the night in prayer. We don't have anything specific from the Prophet ﷺ saying how many numbers he prayed. There's some very weak narrations that seem to suggest it was 20. But we know the Prophet ﷺ spent the night, and then people, initially, didn't they? They congregated around him and they led. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't come out on the 3rd night, if my memory serves me correctly. And the Sahaba were waiting for him, but he didn't pray with them. And the reasoning behind that, they say the Prophet ﷺ didn't want this to become an obligation on the community. And so, but we know that in the lifetime of Umar radiallahu anhu, he found everyone praying in the mosque separately, and so he decided to bring them together, and they agreed upon praying 20 Rak'ahs. Okay? So this is the history behind it, and then we have also a statement of Sayyidah Aisha that the Prophet ﷺ didn't exceed beyond 8 Rak'ahs, night prayers, in Ramadan and outside of Ramadan. Okay? So this is where this contentious issue comes about how many Rak'ahs is Tarawih. So the explanation for the people that argue it's 20 say she was talking about night prayers, Qiyam al-Layl. She wasn't talking about Tarawih when he said he only prayed 8 at night. And what's interesting, even in Saudi Arabia, what do? They pray 20 Rak'ahs, and then in the night, the Imams come and they pray Qiyam al-Layl, 8 Rak'ahs with the people. Okay, this is even in Saudi Arabia. So, yes, the 4 schools and most of the Ummah are agreed upon praying 20 Rak'ahs. The issue is, do you have to pray 20 Rak'ahs? And I think that's more of a concern for people these days. They're not arguing, well, you should be praying 20 or you shouldn't be and so forth. It's like, do I have to pray 20? Because what we have an issue here now is, especially in the Pakistan, Indo-Pak community, is they are adamant on trying to complete the Quran in Ramadan, which is a sunnah. There's nothing, but it's becoming very difficult. And people struggle with that. So what I like, which we do in Keighley, most mosques do this now, is you cater for everybody. You have one mosque that decides to do the whole thing. You have other mosques that just do 3 Rak'ahs in each 3 verses in each raka to make it easy. When I prayed in Turkey, most of the mosques did this. They just did 3 very short Rak'ahs down, Allahu Akbar. And so it just made it easier for people to pray their full 20. And so the community should cater for that. If they're not catering for the mosque, you can decide to do a little gathering in your house where you pray a short Tarawih. If you want to pray a short one, have that service available for the community and make it known amongst your friends and community that that's there. I think every community should have that if it's not being catered for. Now, do you have to pray 20? Well, in the Hanafi school, it's a sunnah mu'akkada, which is an emphasized sunnah to pray 20 Rak'ahs. If you're not praying 20 Rak'ahs in the Hanafi school, you ain't getting your Tarawih. Okay, so if you pray less than that, it's not considered Tarawih in the Hanafi school. So let's go into a bit more detail about this. First of all, what is a sunnah mu'akkada? What does that mean? So it's an emphatic sunnah. What does that? It's an emphatic practice. So it's not fard, it's not obligatory, but it's emphatic. But what does that mean? You shouldn't completely leave it. Okay, is everyone happy with that definition? Sorry? It's important? It's sinful if you completely leave it. What's completely leaving it mean? Can I leave it but not completely? Good, now we're getting into more detail. So if you completely leave it, i.e. you never perform it, it becomes sinful. Okay, has anyone got any other definitions? Okay.
But not everybody has to do it.
Okay, so this.
Not when the community does it. It's sinful.
Good. Yep. So it's talking about does the sunnah mu'akkada mean that if some of the community carry it out, then the others don't? Okay. That's another thing. That's called a fardul kifaya, and we have sunnah kifaya as well. Like a fard kifaya, which means a communal obligation. If someone does it, the others don't have to do it. Like, for example, the funeral, washing the dead. So one person in the community has to at least know how to do that to fulfill their obligation, because if someone dies, their body should be washed. As long as one person in the community knows it, the obligation's dropped. But if no one knows it in the community, it becomes sinful on the whole lot until someone does it, because it's a communal obligation. Does that make sense? So like doctors in the community, that's a communal obligation. There should be Muslims that know how to practice medicine, and so forth, at least one. And then we have sunnah kifayas, it's like i'tikaf. I'tikaf, at least one person should be performing it in the mosque, okay? But it's not an obligation. So this is where we've got to get the definition, the distinction between a sunnah and a fard here. A sunnah, according to the Hanafis, the other schools don't have this distinction, but a sunnah is an act that you shouldn't leave out regularly out of laziness. That's the definition. So if you're leaving it for a reason, so you're sick, you're feeling ill, and so you decide just to pray your fard prayers, for example, you don't pray your sunnah prayers, it's not sinful because you're leaving it for a what? A valid reason. Say you're at work and you've got a small break between for lunch, and you'll only be able to get your fard in, and you won't be able to get your sunnahs in as well. That's permissible because you're not leaving it lazily, okay? And you're not leaving it regularly. So they're the two conditions there. Regularly, without an excuse. So if you left it every so often without an excuse, you just thought, I'm just going to chill today. That's not sinful, but if it becomes a habit of it, then it becomes sinful. Does that make sense? Now, that's really important for when we bring in Tarawih, because in this time when it's difficult, most people, I don't think they're leaving Tarawih because it's out of laziness. They're leaving it because they're knackered and they've been working hard all day, and they come home and they eat and they just think, I am not going to the mosque. I am shattered, I'm just going to pray by myself. So we've got two options here. If you're just really tired, you can't pray anything, okay, then pray what you can, because in the other schools, they consider any sort of prayer at night Tarawih, okay. So if you can't do it all, the 20, then pray a few and do what you can, and then leave it, and you'll get a new intent. You intend with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you say, Allah reward me Tarawih for this, okay? Or you can take the other, you do very, very short surahs, okay? But this is my own personal preference. I think it's better to do something of quality than quantity. You're just knocking out 20 rak'ahs because you want to fulfill 20 rak'ahs, but there's no presence in it. It's just a chicken pecking through the night just to get it done and go to bed. It sort of defeats the purpose, in my opinion. And so that's mine. Another issue that comes up is that if people have qada, missed prayers, you know, from the past they didn't pray, the other schools, this isn't the Hanafi school, the other schools say it's actually sinful to pray any other prayer apart from your fard prayers and your qadas. And so if you are struggling, like what I say to people, if they're struggling to do sunnahs and their qadas, then it's better to pray qadas and intend as a secondary intention that Allah rewards you for Tarawih, for praying your qadas in Ramadan. So feel you do your time spending praying qada prayers and say, Allah, as a secondary intention, may you give me the reward as if I'm praying Tarawih. Okay? So these are options. Okay? I'm just laying out the options for people. Everyone knows their capability. The very thing is that doing a few extra prayers in the night, it's good to go to the mosque, obviously, and pray those 20 rak'ahs. And if you want to pray 20 rak'ahs and your mosque is only praying 8, for example, just go home and finish them off. Okay? Another issue that comes up for people is witr, because sometimes if you're from the Indo-Pak community, the witr is 3 rak'ahs, isn't it? And in the Arab mosques, they pray them as 2 and then 1. Okay? Now, some people walk out, if they wish to walk out and they pray their witr by themselves, there's no harm in that. But there's no harm in you taking the position, because in the Shafi'i school, the Maliki school, and the Hanbali school, they pray them as 2. I don't know about Hanbalis, but I'm assuming. They pray them as 2 and then they pray them as 1. You can take that position and pray your witr according to that school. And you say, well, I don't know the rules of that school. You say, well, you're just being followed by the imam anyway, okay? And another thing that imams do, isn't it? They raise their hands in prayer and dua. The strict Hanafi position is that if they do that, you just leave your hands by your side and you just remain quiet and just carry on. But me personally, I'll put your hands up. It doesn't invalidate your prayer. There's nothing about it being haram or anything. So if you wish to be part of the community saying ameen to the du'as, there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Does that answer the questions about that? Okay, so if someone wishes, they just personally don't feel comfortable, go home and pray, that's not a problem. If you wish to continue, there's no issue with that. It's not an issue of validity of your witr or anything like that. Any questions about Tarawih?
The person who stands with this imam is completed, this written for the so is that inclusive of the witr?
Are you saying the Isha prayer? Are you saying?
Not Tarawih.
Now, that's an interesting question about what's the difference. So I think I might be taking off a slight tangent. So if what's the difference between tahajjud and qiyam al-layl? Are you talking about that, or you?
No, sorry. There's this hadith that man qama ma'a man hatta yansarif kutiba lahu qiyam al-layl.
Right.
So
I've not heard that hadith. I'm not aware.
Yeah, my question was, I think we discussed about witr. So if a person doesn't want to pray, like for instance from the Hanafi madhab,
Yes.
and he doesn't want to follow the imam when he's praying,
Yeah.
the 2 and then the 1, like the Hanafi.
Yeah.
So if he leaves after the 20 rak'ahs,
and finishes by himself.
Yes, so, you know, what I was about to ask is, according to this hadith, he has to stay with the Imam until he's completed the...
Oh, right, yeah, there's definitely not that. Okay, yeah, the Imam doesn't, I mean, I'm not aware of the hadith, but that's not binding. You don't have to stay with the Imam to the end. Do you understand his question? Saad's question, that to get the reward you have to stay with the Imam throughout his whole prayer? No, I don't think any school says that, to be honest. You just can, if you want to, and if you wanted to continue, see, you don't have to limit yourself to 20. I mean, the Indo-Pacs don't. They get up and do some more afterwards anyway. I used to, in Morocco, it's like as soon as your father finishes, they go straight into Tarawih. With the Indo-Pacs, it's like marathon. We're doing our 4 sunnahs after, nafils after, and then we're doing Tarawih, and after that we're going to do another, some nafils after that as well. Okay, and there's no harm in that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Okay, but so as I said, it's not really restricted to 20, to be honest. You can go beyond that if you wanted to. I said in Morocco, they do that in the last 10 nights, they do that. Okay, is that clear for everybody?
Just missed that. Is that like how to pray? Is it to have to pray in between Isha or can you just pray Isha?
Oh yeah, good question. You can delay your Tarawih. It doesn't have to be prayed right after Isha. You can go home. Say you prayed it in the mosque with the Isha with the Imam, and then you go home and pray it later on. That's perfectly valid. There's no issue. Some scholars were of that opinion that it's actually better to pray Tarawih by yourself. Okay. I know some scholars, teachers of mine that practice that. It's entirely, up to you what you prefer. Some people just feel a bit more presence by themselves. Other people feel, if I know myself, if I leave it to my own devices, I'm not going to do it. I'll stay in the mosque and pray it with them. So it just depends on what you prefer. It's all preference. Yeah? Yes?
I think in some months, you don't really get a shot properly.
We're going to talk about that, yeah. Okay, yeah.
How does it work with praying in the Quran?
Okay, good. That's a good question. So in Tarawih, a lot of the people, they pray with the mushaf in their hand, isn't it? Sometimes even the imams, because they don't know much Quran, they have it on like, what do you call it? There's a fancy word for it. I forgot what's it called? The Kindle? No, that's not the fancy word. I've forgotten the word. You know what I mean? Yeah. So in the Hanafi school, it's a bit of an issue because they say if you've not memorized the Quran you're reading from it, it invalidates the prayer. Okay, because the idea is that the idea of the prayer is that you're supposed to be focused with Allah, and it's if you're reading something, it sort of takes away from the focus. Okay, in your fard prayers, out of precaution, it's always best to avoid doing that, and I don't think many people do it in their fard prayers. It's really a Tarawih thing. If you wish, in the Shafi'i school, and I've never read anything in the Maliki school about it, to be honest, but it's valid. Okay, so if you wish to take that position because you wish to have more, some people find it, they actually focus more when they're reading from the Mus'haf. Okay, you can take that position. It's preferable not to. It's preferable, especially if you're behind the Imam, just to be engaged with what's going on. Okay, but people have different temperaments. Some people say, my mind wanders off all the time, I want to be able to follow with something. You could take a position from another school in that. It's not, it's not a major issue. So that's down to personal preference. But just being aware that the Hanafis do consider that invalidating the prayer. Okay. Any other questions about that, related to that? No? Mazin?
Just what you just said now, is that referring to all prayers or fard?
Yeah, that's actually, that's a good point you've raised. So Mazin says, is it invalidate your prayer only in the fard or in the... I've just was doing this issue a few weeks back in Sheffield. To the best of my knowledge, I think some people do make that distinction, to be honest, about the fard and the sunnah. I can't give you that answer off the top of my head. I'm not too sure. Okay, but I'm assuming it's all your prayers, but I'd have to verify that. I don't know.